Alright everyone, so this video is going to be a best case scenario for Donald Trump in the 2020 election. My last video was a worst case scenario. If you're curious what that was like, you can go check that out. But there are a various amount of ways that this prediction could ring out. I've often said that Joe Biden is the weakest Democrat to go against Donald Trump. I still believe to this day that Bernie Sanders would have been the strongest Democrat, and the reason I say that is because of the enthusiasm of his base and his populist economic message, which would resonate with a lot of people in the Rust Belt and various other parts of the country, especially with what's going on now with the coronavirus, with skyrocketing unemployment, and possibly a near economic collapse. But anyway, this video is going to be a best case scenario, so let's jump right into it. The safe states are not going to change. I'm sorry for my die-hard Trump fans who think Trump is going to have a 49-state Reagan landslide. Sorry to break it to you, that's not going to happen, even in a best-case scenario with Donald Trump. So the safe states are going to be the same. Again, this could play out in a number of factors, particularly when it comes to white rural turnout. That's going to be a huge factor in how Donald Trump does this time around. How many of the white rural working class vote is going to turn out for him. So first we're going to start off, again, like the previous video, instead of doing the states by their categories, whether lean, likely, etc., we're going to just do it left to right. So we're going to start with the state of Nevada. Nevada's been trending red overall when you look at presidential elections. Going back to 2008, Barack Obama won this basically by a safe margin, somewhere around 14, 15 points. It was a very big margin. 2012, it was a lot closer, but still a likely margin. And in 2016, Trump won the state by Hillary won this state by 2.5 points. So let's just say that trend continues. Donald Trump gets his turnout out. He increases his share of the Hispanic vote to somewhere 30, maybe even 35% in a best case scenario, which is pushing it. That would put the state of Nevada in a lean Trump margin. So the next state, of course, is going to be the state of Arizona. I think in a best case scenario, Trump won this state by 4 points last time around. In a best case scenario, Arizona would go to Trump by a likely margin, and my definition of a likely margin is anywhere from 7 to 15 points. Obviously, I think even in a best case, it's going to be on the lower end of that. We saw in 2018 Doug Ducey win the governor's race by a safe margin, just about. Now, that doesn't mean a whole lot, but it does mean that it is possible for Republicans to still win big in Arizona, depending on who their opponent is and what's going on in the state of the race. So, Arizona would go to Trump. Oh, no, Trump would not win Colorado by a safe margin. Arizona would go to Trump by a likely margin. The next state, of course, is New Mexico. Now, New Mexico has been trending slightly red when it comes to presidential elections. We can look at 2008, Obama winning this by a safe margin. 2012, Romney losing the state by, I think, well over 10 points. And, of course, in 2016, Trump losing the state by 8 points. So you could see that sort of Republican direction. But there's a large factor in New Mexico that's often not mentioned, and that is the third-party factor. I think Gary Johnson got 9% of the vote out of this state, maybe 9.5%. It was a large percentage. Now, I don't think that percentage is going to be present in 2020, but in a best-case scenario, I would say Donald Trump loses the state of New Mexico, by only a lean margin. So he gets it within 2 to 7 points. Ideally for him, it would be somewhere in the 4 to 5 point range. But he loses the state, but he makes significant ground in New Mexico. So the next state we're going to look at is the state of Colorado. Colorado was only within, I think it was 5 to 6 points last time around. I think in a best case scenario for the state of Colorado, I think Donald Trump could pick up the state of Colorado, but it would be by a tilt margin. And there would have to be a significant third-party factor, but we're talking best-case scenario. Again, I don't know if this scenario is actually going to play itself out. I don't think so. It's wishful thinking. But in a best case scenario, Trump would carry the state of Colorado by a tilt margin. So he'd probably carry it anywhere from, 1 or half a point. It would be a very, very close margin. Of course, this would result from low Hispanic turnout, low minority turnout as a whole, and then high older white working class turnout in the election as a whole. So again, we move down to Texas. I'd say in a best case scenario for Donald Trump, the state of Texas still goes to him by a likely margin, not a safe margin, but on the higher end of a likely margin. Again, 7 to 15 points is what I put likely as. Of course, I think for Donald Trump, in a best case scenario, he lost the state. He won the state by 9 points the last time around, 9.5. He could probably win the state by anywhere from 11 to 13 points in a best case scenario, maybe even 14. But I don't think a 15-point margin is exactly likely, even in a best case. But I think for now, the state of Texas would go to Trump probably around 12 points. Moving up to Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is a state that hasn't gone to the Democrats hasn't gone to the Republicans. I'm making all these blunders. Since 1972. So Nixon was the last president to win the state of Minnesota on the Republican side. I think in a best case scenario for Donald Trump. Now, keep in mind when we talk about trends, the state of Minnesota is definitely in play. And in a best case scenario, I think Donald Trump could win the state of Minnesota by a tilt margin, which would be 2 points or under. Trump only lost the state of Minnesota by 1.5 points. It was actually very, very, very close. And I think given a high turnout of, again, white working class voters, a lower turnout of minority and younger voters, especially with a nominee like Joe Biden in a worst case scenario, this state is going to go to Trump. So that puts Trump at 199 electoral votes to Biden's 187. Again, we go down to Iowa. In a best case scenario, Iowa's still going to go to Trump by a likely margin. Probably increase instead of 10 points, might be even 12 points. He might get more of the vote. We forgot Nebraska's second. I still think Nebraska's second would go probably by a lean margin. The state of Wisconsin. The state of Wisconsin last time around only went to Trump by 0.7%. So it was less than a percentage. I think in a best case scenario, Wisconsin would go to Trump probably around 2.5 points. So that would be in the lean margin. I think my normal prediction is that Minnesota would go to Trump by around a point or so. But it could be anywhere from 2 to 2.5 points to anywhere on the higher end to about 4 points in a best case. And of course, continuing with the best case scenario trend, Trump would win Michigan by a similar amount. Now, Michigan is a little bit more Democratic than Wisconsin. Trump only won Michigan by 0.3% last time. My current predictions have Michigan at around Trump winning it by a similar margin, anywhere from 0.3 to 0.6, maybe improving a tiny bit, but still being able to win the state against Biden. But in this case, Biden is a very, very weak contender. And in this best case scenario, Trump's going to win that state. Ohio's not going to change. Ohio's going to go by a likely margin. We move on down to Georgia. Georgia would go to Donald Trump by a likely margin. So I think on the higher end, maybe anywhere from 8 points to 9 points. Trump won the state by 5 points last time, but he starts winning by a more Romney and McCain margin, which is around 8 or 9 points, which is what I would see in a best case scenario for him. Likewise, Florida in a best case scenario will go to Trump by a lean margin, probably around 2.5 to 3 points. It's definitely possible in the state of Florida. If we go back to 2004, Bush won the state by I think around 4 points during his re-election. The first time he, barely won the state. Of course, that's still debatable as to whether he actually won the state based on the unofficial recount. That's a whole other video in itself. We're going to move up now to Pennsylvania. In a best case, Trump's going to win Pennsylvania by a lean margin. Probably on the higher end of the lean margin, maybe as much as 4 points. So more than the other Rust Belt states, because I think Pennsylvania is the most Republican of the Rust Belt states, even though Republicans in Wisconsin have an iron grip on power, especially when it comes to the state legislature. But that's mostly due to things like gerrymandering and all that. So the power is more illusional in a sort of sense. So when we look at actually like presidential politics, it's a lot more in play. But if you were to look at the state level, you'd think it was a Republican state. Now, moving on down to Virginia, in a best case scenario for Trump, let's see, Trump lost Virginia by around 5 points last time around. It would probably be, I would say, a tilt margin for Trump in a very best case scenario for him. So we're entertaining the idea. I think Trump could win Virginia by a tilt. No, we want a tilt margin. By a tilt margin. Now let's just say in this hypothetical that a lot of the pro Second Amendment folks in Virginia turn out. Western Virginia turnout is very, very high, and turnout in the urban areas of Virginia, Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, the Richmond area, is a lot lower because there's low enthusiasm for Joe Biden, especially low. And there's high enthusiasm for Trump. This state would flip to Trump by a tilt margin, probably under a point or so. It would be very close, just like Colorado. But these two states still, based on the margins they got in 2016, could theoretically flip in a best case scenario. Now, of course, North Carolina would go to Trump by a lean column. It would go to Trump by a lean margin, I think on the higher end of the lean margin, probably around 5 and 6 points. That's right below likely for my scale, but that is on the much higher end of the scale. So I think Trump would win North Carolina by around 6 points, getting around 52% of the vote in a best case scenario. Now we move up to the last two states, Maine and New Hampshire. These two states are very contentious, especially since 2016. Maine only went to Hillary Clinton by around 2.5 points, similar to a close margin in Minnesota, but actually slightly more so. So in a best case scenario, Trump would be able to win Maine by a tilt margin. So he'd be able to win Maine at large by a tilt margin. He'd win Maine's second by a safe margin, and he'd win Maine's first. Joe Biden would win Maine's first district by a safe margin, and that would put Maine at large just in the tilt column and would put Trump at 346 electoral votes. But we're not finished yet. We still have New Hampshire. New Hampshire would go to Donald Trump by a tilt margin as well, giving Trump a total of 350 electoral votes to Joe Biden's 188. Now, of course, this scenario I don't see as very likely, but it is theoretically possible, so I like to entertain the idea. But this is what I see in a Trump best case scenario, absolute best case scenario. Everything's going for him, and that puts him in a landslide electoral college victory and would probably give him the popular vote by around a point or so if this scenario were to play out. But anyway, guys, that's it for today. That's my Trump best case scenario video prediction. We'll be having more predictions and other content coming up in the near future, especially since there's not much to do these days being locked away at home. So we'll try to make more videos in the future on these. But anyway, thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content.